Hi folks, it's Andy. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Right, new video for you. Basically, I thought it'd be great for us to talk a little bit more about Kendo Bogu, what goes into making a Kendo Bogu a little bit, the different things, the different aspects of Kendo Bogu and how to choose them. So I came up with this presentation that I thought we could go through together. As you can see, it's called The Ultimate Guide to Kendo Bogu, presented by KendoStar. Now, KendoStar is my company, of course, that produces and retails kendo equipment around the world. It's fantastic equipment, I must say. So if you do enjoy the video, don't forget to support the channel by doing your kendo shopping at kendostar.com. So yeah, let's get into this video. So what we're going to be talking about today, what we're going to cover in this ultimate guide of Kendo Bogu is the common misnomers and fallacies, the common mistakes or things that people think are the correct things to do when looking for a Kendo Bogu, but are actually misnomers. We're also going to look at what you should think about, what you should consider. We're going to look at the parts of the Bogu. Remember, this is the ultimate guide to Kendo Bogu, so we're going to start right at the very basics with the parts of the Bogu, and then we're going to look at the parts of the parts. We'll look at Bogu stitching, and we'll look at the materials used in Kendo Bogu production. Okay, so let's jump right into it. The common misnomers. So there's lots of these. Some of them are a little bit controversial, and we'll start with sensei knows best. This is a very, very common one. So your sensei may have many years of kendo experience, and they may also practice kendo to a very high level. However, ability at kendo and knowledge of kendo equipment are very different. Most sensei have only ever purchased Bogu for themselves a few times in their whole lives, and they still require the guidance of a professional for making the best choice. Okay, so just because you've done kendo for a long time, you do it at a high level, you still only buy a couple of Bogu sets, a handful of Bogu sets over your sort of lifetime. Whereas a kendo professional, someone like myself that's been working in the industry for a long time, and has seen hundreds, if not thousands, of Bogu sets pass through their business, they know what they're talking about. We exist as professionals for a reason. When I was working in Japan, as in the capacity of a Kendogu professional, I often had the senior senseis, even 8th dan senseis, come and ask me for advice about what kind of Bogu they should choose. So it's not unusual for that to happen. Okay, so yes, I'm not saying ignore what your sensei says, because obviously they do have experience as well of teaching students, but it's definitely worth also seeking the advice of a professional Kendogu supplier. Okay. The next one, and this is a really, really common one, and it really needs putting away, to be honest, but it's tighter stitching is better. We'll talk more about stitch widths very shortly, but in the past it was always thought that the tighter the stitch width or the smaller the number for the stitching equaled better, and it's usually because it's more expensive. And that's especially in the case of hand-stitched Bogu. Tighter stitching is more labour-intensive because they have to stitch it all by hand, so the cost is increased dramatically as the stitching becomes tighter. But it's actually not so much the case with machine-stitched Bogu. Both tighter stitching and wider stitching have very different purposes, and they're valid purposes, all right? It's not that wide stitching is good and tight stitching is bad, or the opposite. They have specific purposes, so you have to consider that when selecting the Bogu, depending on the intended purpose of the Bogu itself. And then the next one, this could be a super controversial one. Made in Japan is the best. So kendo is inherently a Japanese activity, so it seems to follow that equipment made in Japan must be the best, right? Well, actually, no, that's wrong. Made in Japan equipment can be great, yes, but not always, and often equipment made outside of Japan is of equal or even much better quality. The Made in Japan label, of course, is very common as a sales point domestically inside Japan. And that's not just in the Kendogu industry. It's in all sorts of things. It appeals to the abundant sense of national pride amongst Japanese people, and it's naturally expensive because of high production costs. So that basically comes with the implication of better quality because it's more expensive. However, the fact of the matter is that made in Japan, especially in the context of Kendo Bogu, doesn't always mean better. First, there's the fact that Bogu has been manufactured outside of Japan since before the Second World War. And because of that, there's now several non-Japanese craftsmen and workshops outside of Japan that have operated for even longer than many of the Japanese counterparts. Further, there are even Japanese craftsmen who travel to workshops overseas to improve their own ability. Yeah, so they go to these other workshops outside of Japan to learn to improve their own craftsmanship. Secondly, some made in Japan Kendo Bogu, and I stress that is some, is not made so much by loving craftsmen in workshops, but it's actually made in prisons as part of rehabilitative labour. So the quality of that is questionable at best. Okay, it's something that they do as they're incarcerated as part of their kind of the system of rehabilitative labour at some of the prisons. However, it's quite rare now. It used to be more prevalent in the past. These days it's quite rare, but I can think of one place in particular that does still do it. But yeah, from what I've seen of the stuff that comes out of there, and I have seen quite a lot of it, it's kind of questionable in terms of quality. And finally, many things that are labelled as made in Japan, they're not as made in Japan as they might first seem. For example, it's not unheard of for Bogu parts to be made outside of Japan, like the futon or the ago or the mune and stuff like that, parts of the kote, only to just be assembled in Japan and then labelled made in Japan at that point. That's common practice, especially with hand-stitched Bogu, because there's actually the workshops that stitch the actual futon, they've pretty much disappeared in Japan now. There's hardly anywhere, especially outside of those prisons. So yeah, a lot of the made in Japan stuff, not all of it, does tend to be stuff that's the parts are imported and then it's just assembled there. I mean, I've even seen it in the past when I lived in Japan, when I worked in some of these companies, where it was sometimes just as simple as just attaching the kote himo, okay, which anyone could do, and that was enough to get it a made in Japan label. So it doesn't necessarily mean made in Japan, but even so, the point remains is that because it's made in Japan doesn't equal that it's the best. Okay, there's plenty of kendo equipment that's not made in Japan that's fantastic quality and better than the stuff, in my opinion, that is actually made in Japan. So what should you actually think about when you're choosing a Kendo Bogu? You should think about the usage and preferences. So how are you going to use it and what kind of Bogu do you prefer? How will you use the Bogu? Is it your first Bogu set? Obviously, if it's your first one, you won't have built up any preferences. You won't know what you like, and that's especially a good point to seek the advice of a professional. Do you want to prioritize protection, comfort, appearance, or balance, or a balance, sorry. Is it for occasional use or for daily practice? Because all of these different things affect exactly what kind of Bogu will suit you the best. You can't have everything, unfortunately, in a Kendo Bogu. You can't have a Bogu that has maximum protection, comfort, appearance, is super lightweight, extremely super maximum durability, and also cost effective. All of those things are pulling in different directions, so a compromise has to be made somewhere so that you can find the best balance to suit the needs for the intended use of the Bogu. If it's going to be for everyday practice, if you practice 3 times, 4 times, 5 times a week, and you want to use the same Bogu set the whole time, wouldn't recommend that in any case. But even if that was what you wanted, that would be a very different purpose for the Bogu set. than somebody who was an elite tournament player who wanted a Bogu specifically for use in tournaments only, and they were going to use that Bogu only in their matches in specific tournaments. So that would be maybe only once a month for a few, for one specific tournament would be the kind of maximum use of that Bogu. So that's obviously a very different intention again, all right? Or maybe somebody that's attempting a very high level grade, downgrade, and they want something that looks very prestigious and that's going to present very well at the examination. So that's another one as well, okay? So next one is materials and craftsmanship. So based on those things that we just decided how we're going to use the Bogu or what its intended purpose is, what materials and features are we going to look for? Okay, do we want cheaper materials because we don't need it to last that long? Do we want lighter materials even if it sacrifices durability? Or do we want the most durable materials possible? And then, of course, and this is one that's often overlooked, and it's such a shame that it is the service and trust that you receive from the place you purchase the Bogu from. Will you get qualified advice? Okay, now I've been using this, it says here, qualified advice from experienced professional. I've been using this term, Kendogu professional, all throughout this video so far. What does that mean? It means somebody that's experienced in working in this industry. Does the company you choose, does it care about the customers and the wider Kendo community? That doesn't happen in every single Kendogu retailer, unfortunately. Some people are just there to answer emails or just to pick up orders and pack them and ship them. Not everybody makes Kendogu in this industry. Not every single retailer is operated by staff or leaders that are passionate about the industry and passionate about the wider Kendo community and in improving and benefiting Kendo in the community itself. And also, what about if there's a problem? If there's a problem with the order or with the Bogu or whatever it is you've ordered, can you have peace of mind that it will be resolved positively? Yeah, that's not always the case. So that's definitely something you need to look out for. Now, obviously, this presentation is brought to you by my company, KendoStar. That is something that we pride ourselves on, the service we give. And, you can really put your trust in KendoStar. It's something I'm very, very confident of. Obviously, I would say that, but you can check out our ratings online. We've got the highest rated Trustpilot rating of any Kendo shop. It's, our reviews, our customers speak for us in that sense. I'm confident we have a very good reputation in terms of the service we give and the trust that our customers are able to put into us. Okay, and that's something that I think is very, very important. So, what about the parts of the Bogu? Let's start at the very, very basics. Okay, so this is very basic stuff, but this is the ultimate guide, so we're going to cover everything. So we've got the men, which is the mask, literally means mask. Obviously over here, we've got the KOTE, and which to protect the forearms and the hands. We've got the do, which protects the body, and we've got the tare, okay, which protects the thighs and the groin. Okay, so what about the intricate details of these parts? Let's look at the actual parts of the parts, starting with the men. So the men it's probably the most complicated part of the Kendo Bogu. A lot of expertise goes into crafting these. Let's have a look at what the actual parts are. So first, at the very top, let's start there with the menbuchi. The menbuchi. This is the hard part of the men that connects the mengane. The mengane, that's this part, that's the cage, the metal cage that protects your face, to the futon. The futon, that's the soft padded section of the men that is actually hit with the shinai. So the menbuchi is very, very important. It takes a lot of the shock out of the shinai strikes. And it's made of rawhide, which we'll talk about a bit later on. It's usually painted in this black and red color, but sometimes it's in black and black. It's black on the inside as well sometimes. But yeah, that's the menbuchi, the mengane, and the futon. We've got the mimikawa here. Okay, that's that piece of leather there. This is this just gives the membuchi here and the tojikawa here. You see this tojikawa. This is that little strip there, this little strip of leather there. It gives them something to bind onto when the whole thing is put together. Sorry, I just clicked the mouse there. It gives them something to bind onto when the whole thing is put together. Okay, that's what the mimikawa is for. We've got the kazarito here. That's that thick rope stitching here. That's completely decorative. Okay, and that's going to be repeated across the whole bogu. You'll see that as we go through this. We've got the ago, or the tsukidare. Okay, this is the part that protects the throat. And you can see there it has a series of kazarito on it as well. That's quite common. We have the herikawa. The herikawa, that's this leather here that runs either side of the mendare. The mendare is the flaps of the men that protect the shoulders. And the kanji for that is actually, it's men, which is for the mask, and then the dare is actually tare. It's the same kanji, the same Japanese word as the lower body protector, and because it's that kind of sort of soft flappy thing, is kind of what tare means. So that's what that is. And that's why we also say that for that tsukidare as well. So yeah, the herikawa there is there to finish off the edge of the futon to keep it protected and nice and durable. So moving on from that, more parts of the men, we have the futon hari. The futon hari is the protective reinforcement that goes across the futon, and it's made of very different materials, but we'll obviously talk about that a bit later on. It's not red in real life. That red strip there is just to highlight what it is exactly that we're talking about, and it generally runs along the whole length of the men futon, the actual futon. Okay, so it runs along the whole length of it. And on the inside of the men, we've got the uchiwa. The uchiwa, this is the sort of protection that goes around the face. It's not really protection, but it's the padding there that helps the men sit on the face and helps it sit on your head comfortably. There's a couple of other words for this that are usually just other readings of the same kanji, but uchiwa is usually the most common one. I've heard naidin as well, which is the same, just it's just a different reading of the same kanji, but uchiwa is usually the most common. I've not labelled on here because you can't really see them as that well, but there's a pad that goes against the forehead and the chin, and they're called the ten and the chi, which means heaven and earth, by the way. Yeah, they're sewn to the uchiwa when the whole men is put together. We've got the yojin dare. The yojin dare is an extra pad that goes behind the ago that just gives that extra little bit of protection for those missed tsuki strikes. And then we've got the urakawa. The urakawa is a piece of leather that is, it's just a thin strip that just protects the reverse side of that kazarito that we saw a couple of slides ago. Okay, so that just protects it from becoming frayed and then coming undone. Okay. So let's move on to the kote. The kote have also quite a complicated or complex design or build, but not quite as much as the men. Let's start with the futon hari. Okay, you've got those big red squares there that you can see that highlight that same futon hari that we saw on the men. Okay, and they're just there to reinforce the strike zones of the bogu. The kote futon or the futon is sometimes called the tsutsu, which just means tube in Japanese, by the way. And basically, that's this area, this sort of strike zone. It has himo as well, himo. Now, you should know the word himo probably because we use it in other contexts as well. We use himo to tie the men to our head, but they're not an intrinsic part of the men. They're separately attached, whereas we usually count the himo as part of the kote here. Now, this is an interesting term, this eguri. Eguri, it means kind of curve or cutaway, and usually that's used to refer to this part of the kote futon here, okay, here where it's cut away, which sits against the top of your forearm to give you a little bit more mobility and make it a little bit more ergonomic. But it also recently has been used to describe this part of the futon as well. The top of the futon here is sometimes cut with a cutaway like that, which is also sometimes called eguri. And basically, that just makes the kote feel a little bit more comfortable. Whereas traditionally that might have been cut straight and you wouldn't have got quite as much flexibility out of the kote. But these days, most kote are cut with this eguri. They certainly are at KendoStar anyway. Next, we've got the namako, sometimes called kera. These are these kind of parts here on the fist section. Usually there's one of these. Sometimes there's two. There's not much difference between one or two in terms of flexibility. You tend to have more flexibility if you have one rather than none. Some kote, very cheap kote or children's kote, sometimes don't have any. And of course, there's a little bit less flexibility there. But having one or splitting this in two tends not to make much difference. It's more of a aesthetic or decorative thing. The fist section itself is usually called the atama or kashira. Kashira is the same, another reading of the same kanji, atama. So sometimes they use the term kote gashira. And that's because the K from kashira is changed to a G when it's connected to another word in Japanese. But in the bogu world, in the bogu industry, we tend to use the word kote atama more than kote gashira. But for some reason outside of that, in the kendo practicing community, kote gashira tends to be more common. But they both mean the same thing. And another word used for this is kobushi, which kobushi just means fist. And then again, we've got this kazarito decorating it here. This is a special type of kote. This one has what's called yoroi gata or yoroi kazari. And the traditional way of putting the kazarito on the kote would just to have one in the center here and then one here. But the yoroi kazari, it has an extra two either side of it like that. And then instead of just one there, it has two like that. There's some thought that that gives a little bit of extra flexibility. I'm not sure it does massively make a difference. There probably is a little bit of difference because it does break up the filling a bit more. So it does, it makes them a little bit softer. Okay. So we use it quite a lot in our designs because it kind of looks cool as well. Then there's the herikawa. Again, which is just like on the men, that's just the edge in leather there, and that connects the kobushi or the kote atama to the tenouchi. The tenouchi, that's the leather that's used for the palms. Okay, and there's lots of different leathers that are used for that. And then the main parts of the kote. Let's move on to the do. The do is made of two main parts and then lots of little parts. The main parts are the mune. The mune is the chest protector. And the DO-DAI, that's the hard plastron that kind of protects the lower body or the abdomen. And there's lots of different materials that are used for the DO-DAI. We'll talk about those later. But in terms of the mune, it's often decorated with stitching, embroidery type stitching. These days, this is called shokko. And these days, these are often these kind of dot stitches. In the past, sort of 30, 40 years ago, quite intricate designs were very, very popular in lots of different colours. That fell out of popularity probably about 15, 20 years ago. And these, maybe a little bit sooner, actually, maybe 10, 15 years ago, it became much more common to use this dot stitch in just a plain colour. It tends to be preferred. So they're much more common than the very intricate patterns that you sometimes see. It's connected with to you tie the himo when you put the do on using these mune chichikawa. The chichikawa, these loops here that the himo tie to, and they're the mune chichikawa. Now they're easy to confuse with the do chichikawa, which are down here at the bottom left. They're the same loops, but they attach to the do-dai. Okay, and therefore they're where we actually attach the himo to, and then when we tie the do on, we tie it up through the mune chichikawa. You can see the kazarito again, decorating the mune, and the small side part of the mune is called the komune. That means just small mune. Okay, the komune. And on the komune, the kazarito generally runs in lines, and these lines are called mune ashi. And these are usually, there's usually 2 or 3 muneashi. There's no practical difference between these. It doesn't affect the size of the komune. It doesn't make it taller if you have 3 rather than 2. It's the same size. Just if there's 2 instead of 3, one of them's removed and the spacing is just adjusted slightly. Sometimes there's just one, usually on sort of cheaper models. And on very, very cheap sets, there's none, and even sometimes there's not. There's usually on kids sets, but sometimes on on adult sets as well. On the very, very cheapest of the cheap sets, there's no komune at all. The mune just goes straight down and attaches here, and then the DO-DAI is then surrounded by the do-beri. Okay, that's this leather here that runs around from the edge of the mune all the way around to protect the edge of the do-dai. And that's all laced up then. There's holes in this do-dai and it's all laced up with this tojikawa. This tojikawa, it goes through the mune, it goes all the way through and it goes through the do-beri as well. And that brings the whole door together into a single piece. And finally, we've got the tare. The tare. So the tare consists of the mae obi. The mae obi is the big part that sits against your stomach. It has a futon hari as well, as you can see, just like the men and the kote. It also uses himo. We use the word himo to describe these cloth sort of belt parts that we use to tie up the tare. And the panels are referred to as the odare, which means the large tare, and the kodare. Okay, the kodare. Okay, collectively, interestingly, these panels, the odare and kodare, if you were to refer to them all collectively, the correct term would be tare-dare. Okay, and then they're connected to the mae obi with a joint here that's then decorated with this kind of crisscross stitching here, which is usually in a dark navy color, but sometimes is in a different color, like a white or in a red if it's a decorative bogu. And on customized models, you can do that. And that's called the chidori. The chidori. Okay. The kazarito on here is usually placed here at the top of the tare panels. And it's referred to usually as dan kazari, okay? So dan kazari, the kazari means decorative, and dan is the steps. And usually there's like 5 or 6 of these. There's no practical reason for these at all. They're purely decorative. In the past, people used to put more of them on, and it used to be like a sales feature of more expensive bogu. Oh, this has 8 dan kazari and stuff like that, but it's just decorative. And these days, too many is sometimes thought as a little bit garish, especially as it shortens the length of how the odare looks. So usually like 5 or 6 is usually considered the most common. And then finally, here, sometimes you have a bit of reinforcement. It's not really reinforcement. It gets more decorative again. Leather in the corners called sumikawa. And these are sometimes appear on the men too. Oh, sorry, and I skipped the herikawa, but it also has herikawa, just like the men in the kote. And these sumikawa are sometimes there and sometimes they're not. They're not super important. They're more of a decorative feature. So, now we've talked about the bogu parts and the parts of the parts, let's address bogu stitching. So the thing about bogu stitching is I think it's probably up to now been one of the most misinterpreted aspects of Kendo Bogu. We're going to talk about stitch width, which is the big thing. We're going to talk about hand stitching and machine stitching, and we'll have a look at some other stitching types as well. So stitch width refers to the interval between the rows of stitching, okay? The actual width between the rows of stitchings that run along the bogu futon. If you look at this photo, you can see that there's rows of stitching that run along this way, yeah, on this men. And we're talking about this gap here between them, the size of that. That is usually measured in millimeters for machine stitched bogu. Now this photo is a machine stitched set. This is a Vanguard set which has a 10 millimeter stitch width. So this gap is 10 millimeters or 1 centimeter. But for hand stitched bogu, they use the traditional Japanese measuring method of bu. okay? And bu is basically, one bu is 3.03 millimeters, so it's 3 millimeters, okay? Now, just a quick note on the stitch width. Wider stitching, I said at the start, didn't I, when we were talking about misnomers, that it's not that wider stitching is better than tighter stitching or vice versa. It's that you want to choose the right type of stitching in the right area. So wider stitching, like 8 millimeter or 10 millimeter, is more protective because the futon is less compact. Okay, so the futon starts off quite thick with padding, then they run rows of machine stitching through it, or hand stitching, and it gets compacted as they do that. The more that happens, the thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner it gets. So the wider stitching leaves a little bit of thickness in it, and it keeps it cushioned and more protective. And obviously it keeps it more flexible as well. But because there's those wide gaps between the stitching, it does mean that more of the actual fabric, the cotton fabric that makes up the futon, is exposed, which does decrease the durability ever so slightly. So tighter stitching, like 2 millimeter or 3 millimeter, is less protective because the futon's much thinner. It's much thinner, and it's less comfortable because it's stiff. Okay, so like I say, as they put more and more in it, it stiffens up and becomes very rigid, so it becomes very less comfortable. But it's slightly more durable, okay, because it does protect it a little bit more. You'll have to excuse my formatting error there. It shouldn't have come up like that, but I'm sure you'll forgive me. So with that being said, if we look at some hand stitching, there's two main types of hand stitching. This is the Nagasashi type. Okay, now on Nagasashi, what they do is the needle takes the thread on, this is, if we consider this the top of the futon. Now I drew these diagrams a long time ago, I have to say, but they're still pretty much relevant. If we consider this the top of the futon and this the reverse of the futon, the needle takes a thread under here and it takes a long stitch on the reverse side and then makes a small pinpoint stitch on the top. All right, so exposed to the top of the futon is just these little pinpoint stitches. All right, and what that means is there's air gaps here which leave cushioning, okay, in the futon. But also, because it's only little tiny dots that are left on the surface, it's a little bit more durable than hand stitched bogu, machine stitched bogu. So because, yeah, like I said, there's just little dots on the surface. The other type of hand stitched bogu is called tenzashi, and what this is, it's a little bit harder to do because although in concept it's not particularly difficult, to do it evenly across the whole futon is actually quite hard. And what they do here is it's stitched in a kind of, it's not necessarily it's kind of diagonal as per this diagram, but it leaves just a pinpoint stitch on both sides of the futon. And although these air chambers are a little bit smaller than with Nagasashi, there's more of them. All right, so it's still very flexible and well padded, but you get a little bit more durability out of tenzashi because there's no long stitches exposed to the surface of the futon. Now, if we talk about hand stitched bogu a little bit, we can see on the left here that there's pros and cons, and the pros are that it looks good. I mean, nothing looks quite as nice as a beautifully made prestige hand stitched bogu. It looks just fantastic. It's very durable because of the things I've just mentioned. It's flexible because it leaves quite a lot of air chambers in the futon. So that also means it's well cushioned as well. The cons though are it's expensive, and it's very expensive. And it takes a lot of time to produce because it needs somebody to put all those stitches in this futon by hand, and there's thousands of them, right? So it takes a long time. And it's often combined with heavy materials. Now, we try not to do that, but sometimes they use heavier materials for hand-stitched bogu on the basis of them being just high quality. But these days, there's more modern materials. That doesn't mean that has to be the case. But the bogu industry, especially in Japan, is very, very slow to change. If we look at machine stitching, on the other hand, all right, these are where the stitches are applied by an industrial sewing machine, and there's actually two threads that run through the futon like this, okay? So there's a long thread and a pinpoint stitch in between the long threads, okay? That's how the machine interlocks the two threads to bind the futon together. Now, like I said, I drew these diagrams a long time ago, but if one thread breaks and the whole roll will eventually unravel, I mean, that's actually true of hand-stitched bogu as well. And it's not like if one breaks, it just completely unravels like that. It takes a long time for that to happen too. But it is just something that does occasionally happen. So the pros of machine stitch, that it's affordable, much more affordable than hand stitched. I mean, when machine stitching first came about, it revolutionized Kendo Bogu as an industry because it made it much more affordable. However, it was still very expensive in the beginning, but not as expensive as hand stitched. It's got a modern look. Especially these days, it's become much more popular to wear machine stitched bogu. Modern machine stitched bogu looks fantastic. It's good quality. In the past, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, machine stitched bogu was generally much poorer quality. It wasn't as good as the modern stuff. And the modern stuff really does rival the hand stitched bogu for quality and comfort. The old stuff, it used to be very hard, uncomfortable, not very good looking, and also not particularly durable. So it was often made from cheap materials. But modern machine stitched bogu, when they use good materials and they use modern stitching methods, it's really nice bogu. And it's, of course, it's faster to produce because it doesn't need all that time to stitch the futon. The futon itself can be stitched in a day as opposed to months. So what you have in terms of the production is, of course, there's still waiting times because there's an order queue, if that makes sense, when you talk about customized stuff. So it's not that if you ordered a custom machine stitched bogu, it's going to come in a week. It's still going to take a couple of months or something because there's a production line that it's got to fit into, but it's still going to be faster than a hand stitched set. The cons, of course, it is a little bit less prestige than a hand stitch set, but like I say, if you get the very top line machine stitch sets these days that are fully reinforced with the really nice materials and stuff like the Kaisei set that we have and the Praetor, the Vanguard Praetor, just beautiful bogu sets that really do rival the prestige given by hand stitch sets, frankly. But sometimes machine stitch ones are combined with poor materials to get the costs down. So sometimes you see these like $200, $300 bogu sets and they're made from kind of rubbish materials. You won't see stuff like that at KendoStar because that isn't what we stand for. But yeah, that is a bit of a pitfall. All right, so you do have to be a bit careful on not just buying something because it's cheap, because you'll end up buying it twice. So other stitching types that is used in Kendo Bogu, these are mainly on the men or the men futon. Bozashi, sometimes it's called chokuzashi. And this is where the stitching is applied the full length of the futon with no change in the pattern whatsoever. It just goes straight across. If you look at this diagram, again, it's another diagram I drew a long time ago. But these red dots represent the stitches and they go straight across the futon just like that, okay? And there's a photo here that shows exactly what it's like, all right? It's just straight across. And the pros of this is it's cost effective. It's cheaper to make a bogu like this because they can just run it straight through the machine. They just zoom straight through. It's traditional as well because in the past they used to make bogu in this style, and that goes for hand stitching as well. And if you have a very tight stitching on the bogu, it's usually the only possible option, because once they become really, really tight, they can't fit the other. There's not really enough room for them to start maneuvering to use different types of stitching. The cons of this though is it's a little bit less comfortable than some of the other methods we're going to talk about, and because it looks kind of old school, it can look a little bit cheap as well because it is cheaper. It is cheaper to do, so it can look a little bit cheap. There's nanamizashi. This is a really, really popular method of stitching. This is where it's straight across the men futon, but once it gets to the mendare, it changes to a 45-degree angle like this, and that basically makes the futon just a little bit more flexible in the forward direction, which just helps when it sits on your shoulders. So you get improved comfort. But if you run this along in the same, if you do this in the same stitch width, so this photo, for example, shows a 10mm stitched bogu with 10mm nanamizashi, it's a little bit harder to mold them into shape because they're still that very flexible stitching that we've used for the strike zone is the same as we've used on the MENGANE. So if you wanted to have a thicker cushioned strike zone, but you wanted slightly thinner, more stiff, slightly more moldable MENGANE, then you would use gunomezashi. Gunomezashi is where they basically, you have your lines of stitching, and then in between the lines of stitching, at the MENGANE, they put another line of stitching in. So it basically doubles, well, halves the stitch width at the MENGANE. So there's a photo here you can see. This is an 8mm stitch, but once it gets to the MENGANE, an extra line has been put in between, which drops it to 4mm. So this part of the futon will be a little bit stiffer and a little bit easier to mold, but it doesn't need to be super flexible if it's molded right, because it's sitting here. It doesn't need to be super cushioned because it's there to defend glancing blows, it's to deflect blows that have missed here, whereas on the top here you'd want that bit thicker with more cushion to absorb the direct strikes. And it's also more durable because the stitches are close together, and these MENGANE, for example, they rub against your shoulders as you use it. That bit of extra durability is definitely a benefit in this area, and also on the tare as well. And like I said, it's easier to shape, but it does offer that little bit less comfort, so you have to use it in the right area. Other stitching types, this one is a cross between the nanamezashi and the gunomezashi. So what we've done here, this is our Vanguard set, this is our flagship set, it's our most popular set. We've got a 10mm stitch on the strike zone to make it the most protective, comfortable, and cushioned it can be. And then on the MENGANE, we've dropped to a 5mm. So it's the same as the gunome, it's the half stitch width on the MENGANE, but we've also combined that with a diagonal pattern as well. So you get that little bit of extra flexibility from the nanamezashi, but the durability and the moldability of the gunomezashi. We've also got this guard stitch, or this hybrid stitch that we do on some of our bogu sets. This is where we have several lines of close stitching and then a wide gap between them. So this gives the extra durability, but this wide gap produces a very thick cushion, and you can see that on that photo on the left there. You can see how those cushions really do stand out, and when they're bigger, when that gap's bigger, those cushions are even thicker. So it gives it extra protection without sacrificing durability too much. The other type as well, of course, is this cross stitching, or this jujizashi it's sometimes called, cross pitch. There's lots of words for it these days. And basically, this is where they stitch across the futon, but they also stitch in the vertical direction as well. And what this allows them to do is to double the amount of stitching in it without halving the protection that's offered or the thickness of the futon. Now, of course, this is a 6mm example, which is a middle of the road stitch anyway, but this is 6mm in both directions. So these little squares are 6mm. Now, if this was just the 6mm bogu set, it would probably still be slightly thicker because there wouldn't be as many stitches in it. But if you doubled the stitches and made it a 3mm, it would be much, much thinner, much harder, and much less protective than just varying the directions in this way. So it creates these little pockets or cushions. Okay, so you get basically the durability of a 3mm set, but the protection and comfort of something closer to a 6mm set. And it does make it very, very easy to mold as well. So let's look at the materials that we use. The materials, we've got leathers and cottons, we've got the fillings of the KOTE, we've got the MENGANE, and we've got the DO-DAI. So let's kick this straight off with deerskin. Deerskin is traditionally used in bogu design. It's the most traditional thing that you can use. They use it often for the futon, the futon hari, the mimikawa, the ago tsukirare, and the herikawa. Okay, and the pros of this is it's beautiful. It looks really nice, and it takes the aizome dye. Aizome is the traditional indigo dye that we use in Kendo that dates back to the samurai times, and it takes that very, very well. And what that means is, as it ages, it fades very slightly to that beautiful sort of bluish colour that we all know and love, and you see on those experienced senses. It responds very well to moisture as well. Now, some Bogu companies, definitely not KendoStar, but you don't see this from Japanese companies very much either, but some Bogu companies will try to imitate deerskin by using cow leather. All right, so cow leather is terrible for Kendo Bogu. We never use it, and I recommend against it because it does not respond very well to moisture. When it gets wet and it dries again, it becomes stiff, it becomes hard, it becomes very easy to tear or crack. It's a very, very poor material. It goes shiny and it looks awful. So, deerskin, on the other hand, responds very well to moisture. It keeps its natural oils, and it even though it gets wet with your sweat and stuff and then dries out, it still remains relatively flexible, and it doesn't tear and crack in the same way that cow leather does. So you definitely want to avoid anything that uses cow leather. And because of that, it's very durable and it's very flexible. The cons of it, though, is it's expensive. It is very expensive material to use on Kendo Bogu, and it takes longer to dry than some of the other alternative materials. So you have to make sure you let it dry out properly before you use it again. So it does require a bit more care. Another element of the Bogu actually that I just want to talk about now is the membuchi. This is made from rawhide. All right, now that is cow leather, or sometimes it's from pigs. It doesn't make a massive difference which, but it's rawhide. So when the men's made, it's soaked, so it goes very soft and malleable. Then the men is constructed, and that's sewn to it using these tojikawa, and then it dries out and it contracts and it pulls the whole construction together. Now this is always used for the membuchi. There's no decent alternative currently in use. So I wanted to address that because sometimes I get questions about if there's a Bogu that doesn't use any animal products or vegan friendly, that sort of thing. And at the moment there just isn't, because everything uses this rawhide for the membuchi. So moving on from that deerskin that we talked about, there's synthetic versions of deerskin, and it's got lots of alternative names as well. Sometimes they call it clarino, sometimes it's neo leather, eye leather, whatever. There's all these different ones now. And it's used in the same places, in the futon hari, the mimikawa, the ago, the herikawa. And it looks very similar to deerskin, and it responds well to moisture. It's durable, it's flexible, it's very easy to care for. It's not like the deerskin because it dries faster actually than deerskin does, and it doesn't require quite the same attention, and it's cheaper. It's cost effective, but on the other hand, it doesn't fade quite the same as deerskin does because it's synthetic. It's synthetically dyed as well, so it doesn't fade in the same way, and it doesn't fade at the same rate as the cotton that's used for the rest of the futon. So it does look a little bit different as it ages, but it's a great alternative if you want that sort of leather look, but don't really have the budget to go for a full deerskin model. It's not quite as durable as real deerskin either, to be honest. But it's unless you're doing a very, very intensive regular practice schedule, I don't think you're going to really see a massive downgrade in that respect. And then there's orizashi cotton. Orizashi cotton is a thick woven cotton that we use in kendogi. That can be used to reinforce the futon for the futon hari here. Sometimes it's used on the ago like this. And you can see there that it's that sort of woven cotton that we use for the kendogi. And the great thing about that is it takes the dye very well. It dries fast. It's lightweight. Like I say, it takes the dye very well. So it looks great in terms of colour. It's flexible, it's easy to care for, and it's also cost effective. It's actually it's really popular in modern Kendo Bogu design. It's only come about in the last sort of 15 years, I'd say, is orizashi as a material used in terms of popularity. But on the downside, of course, it's not as prestigious as some of the nicer materials, and it's not as durable as synthetic or real disc in either. So there's that to bear in mind. And then there's Aizome cotton. Aizome cotton is what we use for the actual futon construction. So the futon is made using Aizome cotton. It's usually the same sort of material that's used for cotton hakama. And that basically is a kind of, it's made into a kind of bag type thing. And then the padding is put inside. And then the bag is made, the futon hani is stitched to the top, the padding's put inside, and then it's sewn with the machine or by hand. Now there's different weights of cotton available for this area of the production of the cotton. The different weights, and they're measured in these numbers, and it's basically referring to the number of threads in the cotton itself. So the higher the number, the thicker and heavier the fabric is. So if it's too light, like 5,000, then it's not very durable. But if it's too heavy, like a 10,000 or 11,000, the bogu itself becomes heavy and it's quite expensive. So I find that the sweet spot is around 8,000 or 8,800, and for the most part, most bogu is done with around that amount. And then if we talk about the fillings of the kote, this is what goes inside the fist section, okay? And this is, if we look at the synthetic wool here, it kind of looks like that. It's much cheaper than the alternative, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's very durable and it's easy to wash. And modern versions are antibacterial as well. And what I will say as well is I've got on the cons here that it's a bit less flexible, because the other alternative really is deer hair, which we'll talk about in a minute. But modern versions of this synthetic wool, they call it wata in Japanese, they're much better. They're much more flexible than the older versions. The ones from 10, 15 years ago, they were pretty rubbish. It was like boxing gloves. But the modern ones are much better, and they're still very protective. But of course, it is less traditional. And then I've got a typo here where I've put synthetic wool. It should say deer hair. All right, so this is genuine deer hair. Deer hair is the most flexible, and that's because deer hairs themselves they're actually hollow. The individual hairs are actually hollow. So as you use them, as you use the kote that's filled with it, it breaks down, and then it starts to form the shape of your hand. It's very traditional material used for it, and it is very good. It becomes very comfortable once it's been broken in. The downsides of this, though, is that it's more expensive than the synthetic wool, and it's harder to wash. It can be done, but more care has to be taken when you do it. And the other thing is there is a big issue with whether you're using the cheap deer hair or the good quality deer hair. Some of the cheap deer hair, so if you see kote that are really cheap, but they're still got the deer hair fillings, it's possible that they're using the cheaper deer hair, and that stuff isn't great. It can smell quite bad because it hasn't been washed properly before it was put in the kote, or even worse, I've seen in the past where this was many years ago in Japan, where the cheap deer hair had been used in the kote, and some like bugs had laid the eggs in the hair before it was put in, and then they'd hatched out, and all these like little moths were flying out of the kote, and that was pretty gross. So have to be a bit careful of that sort of thing. So next is the MENGANE. The MENGANE is the metal cage that's attached to the men and protects the face. It looks like this. There's a few different types of it. There's the duralumin or duraluminum or whatever you call it, depending where you are. But I use the word duralumin because that's what they call it in Japan. It's the lightest, but is the least durable. Now, about the durability of this, it's an aluminium alloy. So if you do a lot of heavy cake or a lot of heavy practice and you often smash your mengane into your opponent's mengane, then duralumin isn't a good choice. It's not a good idea to smash a mengane into the opponent's one anyway. But if you do lots of intense keiko and only have one Bogu set for some reason, then duralumin's probably not the best choice. You'd be better going with something like titanium, which is stronger but quite considerably heavier. And there is an obvious difference. If you try men on with duralumin, you try them with titanium, you will feel the difference, definitely. Now, the thing is for the most part, most of us don't need that extra durability. That doesn't apply if you're going to do like a Ju-Kendo or something like that. All right, I'm talking only in the Kendo context. If you're going to do Ju-Kendo, I recommend titanium mengane. But in terms of Kendo, duralumin is generally the, it provides enough durability. And then we've got the IBB versions. We've got an IBB duralumin, which is lighter but less durable than titanium, but it's reinforced and it has the IBB balance. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then the IBB titanium, that's heavier than the duralumin one, but it's more durable, and it's got the IBB balance as well. So I keep saying IBB balance. What is that? It stands for ideal best balance, and it refers to how the weight of the mengane is distributed. Generally, it's weighted 7 millimeters further towards the frame and 7 millimeters further towards the top. Okay, so a little bit more towards your face and a little bit higher. And it makes the bars feel a bit lighter. It's a little bit similar to the idea of a do-bari shinai, having the center of balance closer to you. It just makes it feel that little bit lighter. And in the case of the IBB duralumin model, the uppermost two bars are reinforced actually with a stronger material. So that's where it's actually hit with the shinai. So it receives extra durability just in those areas. So yeah, the other thing as well is that the monomi is a slightly wider bar on all mengane. It has a slightly wider bar, which is to line up with your eyes. And that is slightly wider, just 1 millimeter wider on an IBB mengane. Now, because it's reinforced, because it's lighter and perfectly durable enough for the vast majority of people, we use almost exclusively the IBB duralumin, except on some of the cheaper models we use a regular duralumin, but we hardly use titanium at all unless that was something you specifically requested, because it's certainly durable enough for me, and I do quite a lot of practice, and it's durable enough for most people, so you don't need to sacrifice that extra, having that heavy, cumbersome feeling. And then if we move on to the DO-DAI, the DO-DAI is the solid part of the door that protects the abdomen. It's available in different colors and you're using different materials. There's a lot of different colors here. You can see this is just a small example. Now, one thing I really want to say on this is that the DO-DAI color is not attributed to anything like your skill level, your rank, or anything like that. It's purely decorative, and you are free to choose whatever color you like. There's no rule saying that you have to be a certain grade or a certain ability to wear a different colored one. And it is not correct to say that if you're showing off, if you want to wear a different colored door and you should be beaten up for it or anything like that. That's nonsense. And that's another thing that really needs to disappear from the international kendo community. I never heard that in Japan. I never heard anyone say anything like that in Japan. It's your money, it's your choice. You're able to choose how you want your bogu to look. And if you want a colored door, you're free to do so, okay? And if you're the sort of person that picks on people for having a different colored door, then don't do that. Okay, so most come as standard with black, but as an upgrade, you can get whatever color you want. The different types, the different materials are synthetic plastics and resins, and this is the most common type of do-dai material. They're usually either like a high-impact plastic or a polyamide resin, if I've pronounced that right. Now, these polyamide resin ones, these are usually known as Yamato Do, and that's a brand name. There's just one producer of Yamato Do, one specific manufacturer, and they produce door called Yamato from this polyamide resin. It's very, very similar to the high-impact plastic ones. It's almost indistinguishable. Generally speaking, they come in single-piece types, 50-piece types, 60-piece types, and 64-piece types. And what that means is the single-piece type, it's just flat on the reverse side. And the 50-piece, 60-piece, 64-piece, it has these ridges on the inside that make it look like a bamboo door. They're not actually 50 pieces or 60 pieces or 64 pieces. And the standard is 50-piece type. It's just a backing that goes on the back of the door die. It just makes it a little bit thicker, and it just looks like a 50-piece type bamboo door. The 60-piece and 64-piece, in the case of the synthetic door, are larger than the 50-piece. So if you need a very large door, then you might need like a 64-piece. We normally go straight from 50-piece to 64-piece if we're going to upsize, because there isn't a massive difference between the 60-piece and the 64-piece. The great thing about these is they're very durable, and they're very easy to care for because they're just plastic. You just wipe them down if you want to clean them. And they're very lightweight, much lighter than bamboo versions. They're very protective, especially if you have the 50-piece type. And there's a massive colour choice. There's loads of different colours you can choose from. And the really great thing about them is that they're size adjustable. You can adjust the size of them yourself very, very easily. The other type is the fibre door. Now, this is less common, and it's made from compressed paper. This was the first type of synthetic door to be developed as an alternative to bamboo door. And these are only available in the single-piece type. They're quite durable though, they're still very durable, and they're very lightweight. They're even a little bit lighter than the plastic ones, but a little bit less protective because they're a little bit thinner. And because they aren't super popular, there is quite a limited colour choice these days. And then there's also the bamboo. Now this is obviously the most traditional type, sometimes called urushi nuri. So urushi is the Japan lacquer. It's a lacquer that comes from a tree. It's very, very toxic, very poisonous when it's wet and hasn't been dried. So it needs a very expert craftsman to apply it properly. But when it's dry, it's perfectly safe. And this is made from bound staves of bamboo. So they get these bamboo strips and they bind them together like a barrel into a door. Usually these come in 50-piece, 60-piece, 64-piece, but 60-piece is the most common with these. And it doesn't necessarily affect the size. It just usually means that there's smaller staves. But for larger ones, they might need to add extra staves. So sometimes a larger one might need more staves. They look very beautiful. A really nice lacquered urushi door is just really, really nice. They're very, very protective because they're very, very thick and they're very solid. They're very sturdy. And there's a wide range of colours and textures because they're sort of made to individual order. So there's also variance between them. If you have two of the same colour plastic door and two of the same colour bamboo door, the two plastic ones will be exactly the same, but the two bamboo ones will be slightly different. They are less durable, and they're a little bit harder to look after. You have to, not massively, but you just have to be careful of like not exposing them to extreme temperatures or changes in temperature. So if you live somewhere very cold and you take them from outside the warm heated house outside into the snow or something like that, I'm not sure why you would do that, but if you did, or the opposite, you know, if it's very cold in your car or something, it's been in there a while, and then you take it inside to the warm house, that could affect it. All right, so you have to be a bit careful. They're very heavy because how they're made is there's staves of bamboo, then there's a piece of canvas, very thick cotton, placed over that, and then a piece of rawhide leather is then placed over that, and then that leather is then lacquered. Okay, so you've got a layer of bamboo, you've got a layer of canvas, you've got a layer of rawhide leather, and then you've got a layer of several layers of urushi lacquer. So they become very heavy, and they're of course very expensive because they're handmade using these traditional techniques and materials, and because of that, of course, they also take much longer to produce. And then if we look at Same do, Same is a traditionally prestige door material, and they're also bamboo. They're made from bamboo as well, but instead of the raw hide, you have a layer of ray skin over the bound staves of bamboo. It's not actually from sharks. Often they're called shark skin door. That's because the word same means sharks. Same means shark in Japanese, whereas actually it's ray skin. All right, it's not actually from a shark. So the thing about these same do is that they look beautiful, very traditional. They're very protective, of course, just like the other bamboo do. And they're available in two finishes. Either a rough ishime finish, which is where the ray skin is simply lacquered over and it retains its rough texture. And then there's the smooth or gloss finish, which is called migaki, and migaki means to rub or to abrase, and basically what they do is they sand down the scales so they get a smooth texture, and then they lacquer over that. So you still get that appearance of the same, but the feel of it is a kind of gloss, smooth surface. Now the thing about them is they're not super durable, all right? Especially the smooth ones, but even the rough ones as well. They're not super durable because the same doesn't take the urushi perfectly. It certainly doesn't take it as well as rawhide leather does. So yeah, they're not the most durable ones in the world. You know, you're not really supposed to use them for everyday practice. They're very, very heavy. They're much heavier than the regular bamboo do, and they're expensive. All right, they're expensive because, like I say, they're made from using these ray skins. Now, these rays are the rays are farmed. It's not like they go out and catch them and stuff. But the thing is even though they're farmed, it's very rare that they grow to a size big enough to be able to be used on a DO-DAI. And they need a very big one, and they don't do that in captivity, apparently. And of course, there's a massively increased production time on these as well. So yeah, expect to wait a long time and pay a lot of money and not wear it very often. So now we've gone through all that. Now we've gone through all those different specifications and different ideas of what it all means. What we can talk about now, we can have a look at some example specifications, and hopefully they'll start to make a little bit more sense. Here we've got the Vanguard. Now this is our flagship model at KendoStar. Super massively popular. It has 10mm stitching in the strike zone, so remember that's the interval between the gaps. 10mm is a wide stitch width. That means that it's protective, it's well cushioned, and it's comfortable in the strike zones. And then we use that 5mm naname diagonal stitching on the mendare. Okay, so it's a bit like the gunomizashi. We use a finer, tighter stitching on the mendare to get that extra durability where it's going to rub against your shoulders and where you want it to mold. And then also we use 5mm on the tare panels as well. So that's again where it rubs against your thighs and where you want to make it into a nice shape. The futon hani is aizome orizashi fabric, which is lightweight, dries quickly, and makes a nice colour. So it's an ideal material for this range of bogu set, this kind of level of bogu set. The herikawa and actually the fist the kote atama, I haven't written that on here, but the kote atama are all synthetic deer skin, which is a great material for that because it still looks great. It looks like the real thing, but you don't have to pay the extra for it. We've got the IBB duralumin mengane, so that's the one that feels lighter and has the reinforced bars. At the top, we've got antibacterial synthetic wool in the kote filling. And we've got a 50-piece type synthetic DO-DAI. So this is the perfect bogu set for a first-time purchase, first-time bogu set, or someone that's more experienced. Any level of kendoka can use this bogu. I use this bogu myself for my regular practices because it still looks great and it performs really, really well, especially given its lower cost. So that's why it's a great choice for beginners, but also as a practice set or a secondary set for a more experienced kendoka. But if we jump up the scale a little bit, we'll look at the Vanguard Praetor, and that takes a similar spec and it really pushes the prestige there. It turns it up to 10 for one of a better phrase. We've got 8mm stitching on the strike zone, so again a nice wide stitching where it's going to need it, where it needs that extra cushioning and comfort. But you've got 4mm gunomizashi on the mendare and on the tare panels. Okay, so it's got that gunomizashi to give it that extra durability and moldability, and it retains that traditional look because this is a little bit more of a traditional prestige bogu on the mendare and on the tare panels where it really needs it. All of the leather on this is the futon hari, so the whole futon, the herikawa and the kote atama are all using genuine deerskin. Genuine deerskin for that, so it looks absolutely beautiful. It's going to fade really nice, it's going to age really well, and it does really look like a nice bogu set. Kote filled with top grade genuine Japanese deer hair for that extra flexibility, and that, again, it's that traditional sense of this bogu. And as standard, it comes with a 50-piece type synthetic door, but you can of course change that if you wanted to. It's a beautiful bogu set. Again, this is probably more designed for a more experienced kendoka. It's not really the entry-level model, but if somebody that's kind of been doing kendo for a long time and you know is really invested in kendo and wants a good quality prestige bogu set that they can rely on for a long time, or just something that they can have that looks really nice when they're at a special event, or if they're at a grading, or for a shiai or something like that. It's great in that respect. Okay, so they're just some examples. If you go to our website, there's loads of others. The thing is, you know, if you enjoyed the video, then of course don't forget to support the Kendo Show by shopping at KendoStar.com, and you can get in touch with us at mail@KendoStar.com there as well. So if you've got any questions about any of what we talked about, or if you're looking for a bogu set and you still, even after watching this video, you still need some guidance, that's what we're here for. Just send us an email, mail@KendoStar.com, and myself or one of our other professionals will come back to you with the advice that you need. Okay, and you can see there, that's our website. It's a very user-friendly experience using our website. It should be very easy for you to browse. We've got different offers going on all the time, so you can always get a good deal. So yeah, it's a great place to go and get your kendo gear. And as I said earlier in the video, right at the start actually, about choosing somewhere that provides a good service and somewhere that you can trust, I just want to reiterate that, and that's something that we really pride ourselves on at KendoStar. Here's, you know, an example of some of the things our customers say. We've got a fantastic rating from our customers. We're by far the top rated site online for kendo equipment, so you know, you really can put your trust in us with regards to that. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed making this and presenting it to you. This is something I'm really passionate about, you can probably tell. It's a really important thing, though, I think it's often overlooked, is understanding the aspects of Kendo Bogu and choosing the right one. And like I said, most importantly, is seeking the help of a professional if there's something that you're unclear on, and making sure you choose the right place to do that. I think you've got the hint that I think that should be KendoStar.com. But thank you for joining me. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, all that sort of thing. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.